allowance.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. Thousands of Guyanese will no longer have to pay income tax as part of a package of measures to ease the impact of rising cost of living. The opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, has to decide who will replace Mr. Joseph Harmon as opposition leader. In the region, Barbadian police are yet to be paid $10 million in allowances 11 years after Parliament had approved the money. And internationally, 6 young Japanese people are suing the operator of Fukushima nuclear plant after developing thyroid cancer in the years following the 2011 nuclear disaster. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. Guyanese who earn $75,000 per month or less will no longer have to pay income tax. Finance Minister Dr. Ashney Singh made the announcement in his 2022 National Budget speech.
Mr. Speaker, along with all of the other measures proposed to increase disposable incomes, our government would also like to provide additional relief to taxpayers. In this regard, we are proposing to increase the monthly income tax threshold from $65,000 to $75,000 monthly. This releases immediately, sir, into the hands of current taxpayers a total of $1.3 billion of additional disposable income.
He says that the increased revenue from personal income tax of $8.2 billion was driven by higher remittances by employers in both the public and private sectors. The Guyana government yesterday announced several measures, including the cutting out of middlemen to reduce the cost of living. Finance Minister Dr. Ashney Singh says evidence shows that the cost of basic items are cheaper at farms. He says the prices increase at existing markets because of transportation, handling, and reselling. In his 2022 budget speech, he said that special markets would be held across the coast.
In the interest of reducing inefficiencies in this process, we will be arranging monthly farmers' markets at locations to be specified in East Berbice, East Coast Demerara, Georgetown, East Bank Demerara, and West Coast Demerara in the first instance, with the possibility of extending to other locations depending on the initial experience. Mr. Speaker, this will help our farmers to find ready markets for their produce, and it will help consumers to benefit from the price advantage of buying directly from the farmer.
In the area of fuel, Dr. Singh says the government will immediately be lowering the excess tax rate further on gasoline and diesel from 20% to 10%. The finance minister also announced that billions of dollars would be provided to assist most needed communities after discussions are held.
Mr. Speaker, given the complexity of the factors driving price increases and the limited policy instruments available to mitigate these increases, we intend to engage in further consultations with the communities most affected, both on the coast and in the hinterland, on possible interventions to help ease the impact on the most vulnerable in society. To this end, sir, and in order to meet the cost of the interventions to be implemented after we would have conducted these consultations, Budget 2022 allocates a sum of $5 billion to address this question of cost of living.
The finance minister says that also in an effort to reduce the cost of living, the government will extend the reduction of freight cost component in the CIF value that is used for calculating import taxes, rolling back freight costs to pre-pandemic levels. Dr. Singh says this has contributed to the reduction of import duties, excess taxes, and VAT charged on imported items. He says this measure was initially due to expire on the 31st of January 2021, but will now be extended to this year end. The finance minister says this measure is expected to cost in the order of $6 billion in 2022. 83,000 Guyanese who receive public assistance and old age pension will now get more money. Finance Minister Dr. Ashni Singh says public assistance will be increased from $12,000 to $14,000. 18,000 persons are expected to benefit from this year's increase, which will amount to $432 million. Dr. Singh says old age pension will be increased from $25,000 to $28,000. This, he says, will amount to $2.3 billion of additional disposable income. The old age pension was previously increased from $20,500 to $25,000 monthly just last year. The uniform allowance and the Because We Care cash grant for the more than 200,000 children across Guyana will this year be increased. Finance Minister Dr. Ashni Singh says that the yearly uniform grant to the parents of each school-age child will this year be increased from $4,000 to $5,000 per child. He also says that the Because We Care cash grants to children in the public and the private schools will increase from $15,000 to $25,000 per child. The finance minister says this will place an additional amount of $2 billion in the homes of the same 200,150 children attending both public and private school. Mr. Joseph Harmon has resigned as opposition leader, but that constitutional position is yet to be filled. The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, of which Mr. Harmon is a member, says that it will address the issue of filling the position of leader of the opposition with its coalition partners in the shortest possible time. House Speaker Manzoor Nadir says that APNU plus AFC Chief Whip Christopher Jones has informed him that they will say when they are available to meet for the election of a new opposition leader. Mr. Nadir says that at 11:40 Wednesday morning, he received Mr. Harmon's letter of resignation. His resignation on Wednesday followed his demitting office as General Secretary of APNU. While Mr. David Granger has resigned as APNU chairman, he remains the representative of the list of candidates. People's National Congress Reform PNCR leader Aubrey Norton was Tuesday elected as APNU chairman. Earlier Wednesday, APNU parliamentarian Roysdale Ford, who had performed the functions of opposition leader, in the absence of Mr. Harman, said he was not aware of any move from him to eventually take over that constitutional office. The majority of opposition parliamentarians would have to vote for the new nominee. Mr. Norton had said that his party's Central Executive Committee had decided that he should emerge as the new opposition leader and representative of the list. A Jamaican man is in custody after he was allegedly caught on half-acre marijuana farm at Nabaclis, East Coast, Demerara. The Customs Anti-Narcotics Unit, CANU, said that during the operation on Tuesday, a shotgun, several types of ammunition, a crossbow, and several arrows were also seized at the location. He has been identified as 46-year-old Winston Thompson. CANU said its agents found about 5,000 cannabis plants and seedlings, processed cannabis, and 1 kilogram of mixed seeds. The anti-drug agency said it continues to conduct their operations around the country aimed at dismantling the networks that are engaged in the cultivation, sale as well as distribution of narcotics. Now for the news in the region. 11 years after former Attorney General Adriel Brafitt signed an order approving the payment of various allowances for members of the Barbados Police Service, BPS, the money has still not yet been granted. Barbados Today reports that more than $10 million was provided for in the 2010-2011 budget. It included payment for detectives, plainclothes officers, washing, travel, flexible responsibility, duty allowance, and special operations. When contacted, President of the Barbados Police Association, BPA, Mervyn Grace, said he was aware of the long outstanding payments for the allowances which had been approved in 2010. He said he was taking steps to have the situation settled. And lastly, in the region, residents in Antigua and Barbuda who are afflicted with non-communicable diseases, NCDs, are being encouraged to make lifestyle changes to help combat the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their health. The call was issued by non-communicable disease NCD coordinator in the Health Ministry, Nurse Valerie Williams. NCDs such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes claim the lives of millions of people each year, accounting for a significant percentage of all deaths globally, and international reports are that those figures have increased since the start of the pandemic. Nurse Williams is encouraging Antiguans and Barbudans to walk and play sport, get good sleep, and drink a lot of water instead of sweetened drinks. Here now is your international news coming from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. The army in Jordan has warned that it will strike with an iron fist against drug traffickers after 27 suspected smugglers were killed as they tried to cross the border from Syria. The authorities have previously sieged large hauls of amphetamine hidden in Syrian trucks. Mike Thompson is following the story.
There was heavy snow on the border between Jordan and Syria, so I'd imagine that the smugglers must have thought this was a good time to try a large-scale operation. And drugs were found by Jordanian border officers in trucks when they tried to cross the border. And it resulted in a gunfight because this group of smugglers were accompanied by an armed group. And it meant that in the clashes, 27 people died, several were wounded, and some others managed to flee back into Syria, carrying some of their drugs with them.
The Kurdish-led militia, the Syrian Democratic Forces, say as many as 90 jihadists at a jail in northeast Syria have still not surrendered despite a week of fighting. The SDF had said they'd regained full control of the prison. Islamic State militants first attacked it last Thursday. Floods caused by Tropical Storm Anna are continuing to cause havoc in southern Africa. Malawi has declared parts of the country disaster areas after at least 19 people died. Madagascar and Mozambique have also been badly affected. Here's Will Ross.
The authorities in Malawi have been struggling to get the lights back on after Storm Anna destroyed infrastructure and led to a nationwide power cut. Dozens of camps have been set up for the displaced. The floodwaters have also caused chaos in Madagascar, where schools in the capital Antananarivo have been turned into emergency shelters. 41 people have died and over 100,000 have been forced to flee their homes. Mozambique is facing ever more frequent and intense tropical storms and cyclones. The Prime Minister, Carlos Agostinho de Rosario, says whilst not contributing much to climate change, Mozambique is being hit hard.
Western diplomats who've met Taliban officials to discuss Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis say they'll expand aid operations. After a summit in Norway, the envoys from the US and several European countries said the aid was contingent on the Taliban respecting human rights. Warren Ball reports.
On Wednesday, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that over half of all Afghans faced extreme levels of hunger, with some families even selling their babies to purchase food. In their statement, the envoys said they discussed how to remove obstacles to aid to help prevent the collapse of social services and revive Afghanistan's devastated economy. One of the big issues is whether to give the Taliban access to $9.5 billion worth of frozen assets held abroad. The diplomats said they'd also put pressure on the Taliban to stop the detention of women's rights activists and clampdowns on the media.
World News from the BBC. Russia has said there is room for further dialogue on the Ukraine crisis, as large numbers of its troops remain on the border. In its first reaction to a US letter officially setting out Washington's position, the Kremlin said its main security demands had not been met, but its spokesman said there would be no rush to judgment. State television in Iran says it's investigating a case of hacking that briefly interrupted a broadcast with anti-government messages. For about 10 seconds, images of exiled opposition activists were superimposed on the regular output of the Network One television statement. Another graphic and voice recording called for the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The first female president of Honduras, Xiomara Castro, will be sworn in today in the middle of a political crisis. She won November's election, ending the National Party's 12 years in power. But Ms Castro's agenda has been undermined by a feud between two factions of her Libre Party. Will Grant reports.
As the country's first woman president, her inauguration will be attended, among others, by the first woman vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris. As president, Ms Castro, who is also the former First Lady of Honduras, has proposed a wide-ranging agenda for change, including tackling the country's deep-rooted problem with drug trafficking gangs, bringing down rocketing utility prices, and liberalising the country's strict abortion laws.
A small group of survivors of the Auschwitz concentration camp have returned to the site 77 years after its liberation to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. Among the testimonies will be the voices of 3 women who were on the first Jewish transport train sent to Auschwitz by the Nazis from Slovakia in 1942. During the Second World War, the Nazis murdered more than 1 million people, mostly Jews, at the camp in occupied Poland. It was liberated by Soviet troops in 1945. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. Thousands of Guyanese will no longer have to pay income tax as part of a package of measures to ease the impact of rising cost of living. The opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, has to decide who will replace Mr. Joseph Harmon as opposition leader. In the region, Barbadian police are yet to be paid $10 million in allowances 11 years after Parliament had approved the money. And internationally, 6 young Japanese people are suing the operator of Fukushima nuclear plant after developing thyroid cancer in the years following the 2011 nuclear disaster. And that was your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/dem